All right, welcome back to another episode, second episode of Kherson Weekly. I'm going to be covering 27th October to the 2nd of November 2025. This is hot off the press, just finished the article a couple minutes ago, so we'll read through the article and go through the videos together. All right, and you can find this article on Kherson Weekly. Which is the weekly newsletter that I write at Brennan Kelly, BrendanKelley.substack.com. All right, let's hop into it. So this week, Russian shelling of children's hospitals in crowded markets, drone data, and civilian casualty updates. And here you can see the aftermath of the shelling in the Dniprovsky market. On the 31st of October, 2 people were killed, including one woman who was a vendor at the market, and a man nearby in an apartment building. Again, I'm always going to have this here, guys. Please donate to Anti-Human Safari. You can make a difference with, like, if just like 3 or 4 people team up, you can make that 175 USD really quickly with just a few donations, and you can actually make a difference for people on the ground in Kherson. And that's really the most important thing, that if we can affect change on the ground, then we really need to make sure that we're doing that. So, video of the week. This one's going to be a tough one. While people among Ukraine's Western allies celebrated Halloween, Dia de los Muertos, and All Saints' Day this week, Russian artillery pummeled Kherson's Dniprovsky market, killing 2 civilians and wounding at least 16 others. Local volunteer Boxer shows the horrific aftermath of Russia's attack, as he, other volunteers, and the spouses of the fallen carry out cadaver recovery operations. The anguish of fellow merchants and the relatives of the fallen weighs heavy on all of them. The Khersonians persist defiantly despite the terrorist Russian forces across the river, holding a sword over each of their necks with each shell, skid, and drone. Be warned, this is a tough one. And then I'll do a loose interpretation of the video afterwards. We'll watch it, and then I'll kind of tell you some important things that are said. I won't translate line by line.
Обстріляв ринок, загибло є поранення. Опять виход. Це коли трапилося?
Там полчаса или час назад, не знаю когда.
Примерно где-то час-полчаса назад.
Сразу один умер, а одну мужчину.
А сколько это было времени?
Ударили по ринку, вбили жінку, котра просто торгувала, заробляла собі на життя, якось вижити. І одного ранило. Тварі. Ось. Ось жінка. Власний чоловік. Ось свою дружину.
Я ще не вірю, чесне слово, не вірю.
На жаль, вбило ще одну людину. Зараз будемо збирати тіло. Були вдома і прям прильот. Жінку вбило на кухні.
А он, наверное, был курил, наверное.
І оце його вбило, да?
Ударил осколком. Он, видать, я вижу, что сигарета валяется, видать.
Просто вийшов, почався обстріл і попав, да?
Ну, неожиданно туда прилетело, все.
Чоловік на балконі курив, прямо осколок в спину і насмерть. Сьогодні обстріляли район ХБК, ринок. Росіяни сьогодні вбили людей. Дуже шкода жінку, котра просто приїжджала з текстильного, щоб щось заробити, вижити. Сьогодні вона мертва. Чоловіка вбили за 60 років. Ось таке життя в Херсоні. Ти не знаєш, коли куди може прилетіти.
Okay. So a couple things. You could see the first part was the evacuation and recovery of the woman's body. One important detail was that Andrei was accompanied by the spouses of the deceased as well, the widow and widower of the deceased. And the widower said, like, I still can't believe it. I can't believe it. After he helped them move his wife's body. And the man on the balcony, the man was killed while he was smoking out on the balcony, is what he said. But his wife was okay because she was in the kitchen. So he was just right around the corner out on the balcony and got killed by the shrapnel from the artillery shelling. Yeah. Absolutely terrifying stuff. We'll talk more about it in a little bit, but first I want to get through some drone data. So drone data this week, we actually saw Ukrainian forces posting their tied for best interception rate all year round. As far as we've been getting statistics, this is pretty much the best they've done. We got 2,544 drones out of 2,646 drones. So that's really, really solid. But just to note, we are seeing a drop in volume, just slightly. So Russian forces posted their fourth highest weekly total of SUAS drones, small unmanned systems, launched towards Kherson, 2,446 total. This falls on the heels of their highest total all year last week of nearly 2,900 drones. Attacks have been ramping up in volume since the major transfer of personnel out of the Dnipro grouping of forces toward operations in Donetsk and Zaporizhia oblasts. However, this week marks the first decrease in weekly attacks since that shift in late summer, early autumn. Ukrainian forces continue to build on their successes in counter Russian human safari drone tactics, posting yet another interception rate at 96%. Since late August and early September, Ukrainian forces in Kherson Oblast have steadily been improving their interception rate despite record volumes of Russian drone attacks. This continues to suggest that Ukrainian counter unmanned systems operations have adapted to counter Russia's saturation tactics. Rather than develop more resilient drones that can survive Ukrainian CUAS operations, Russia is seeking to leverage volume to achieve better results. This seems, however, to not be a successful strategy for the Russian forces. This week, Russian drones were only successful 43 times in Khersonska urban Ramada, and only 59 times in the rest of Kherson Rayon and Beryaslav Rayon combined. For both inside and outside Khersonska urban Ramada, these are the second lowest weekly totals for successful Russian drone attacks all year, only topped by the final week of August. Currently, the average in Khersonska urban Ramada is nearly 20 successful drone attacks daily. Thus, in context and in comparison, Ukrainian forces are punching well above their weight. And as we can see, as we crawl closer to 100,000 here, we're getting there. bit by bit, that doesn't really make it all that much larger. Not really worth it. But we're crawling towards 100,000 total for the year. We are missing data for a couple of weeks because the administration didn't share it. Excuse me. So we may be closer to 100,000 than we actually are. But keep in mind, right, those average numbers compared to the numbers that we're seeing right now. So Ukrainian forces are really, really pushing the higher end of the envelope in terms of their capabilities, it seems, and the Russians actually are too, but the Ukrainians seem to be coming out on top, which I think is really good, because we've seen situations where the daily average has been closer to 100, and we've been seeing, numbers over 500 for a weekly average for successful drone attacks. So we don't want to see that weekly average reach those old numbers. And I suspect it was probably even worse before they started releasing data, like in late 2024. So it's just important that we have that we have the success that we have right now encountering the human safari, because ultimately it's saving lives. Given that foliage has essentially, it hasn't completely dropped off the trees in Kherson as far as I know, but in most locations it's beginning to. So that removes one layer of protection, cover, and camouflage. So we're gonna need this counter UAS success to keep up through the rest of the fall and early winter in order to make sure that we save as many lives as possible. Okay. As you can see here, right, it's fourth all time in terms of the Russian drone attack volume, but just look at the difference between those early spikes. There's a huge gap between the Ukrainian interception rate and the Russian volume. And even these like kind of lower spikes here, major gap in capability. But then you can see something changed right around late August, early September. And Ukrainian forces have been matching them. And you can see it tracks in the different regions too, in Khersonska, Urban Hromada, and outside Khersonska, Urban Hromada. So you can see how they're tracking like that really closely, and that just means the Ukrainians are keeping up with the Russian volume. So the Russians, because they don't have quality, quantity is a quality of its own to an extent. It does seem that, if you're allowing less than 10% of all drones, that's really not that bad. That's really something to be proud of. Now we do have to be aware, right? Like 18 people were injured this week by drones, or 19 people were injured by drones this week total. But we have had weeks where it was closer to 50. So, keeping things in perspective, this is a marked improvement. Okay, and yeah, here's the interception rate over time, right? As you can see, right, we're starting to see higher peaks in this sort of like third phase. You can kind of think of it as like a third phase here. It's just a much more successful phase, where there's kind of this middle phase where, especially over the summer, interception rates were pretty abysmal, worse than they had been in many places, except like outside Khersonska, Urban Hromada in early winter of 2025. That was pretty bad. Early spring, late winter, I should say, not early winter, late winter, early spring 2025. Those interception rates are pretty bad. That repeated itself over the summer, and then we've had this major improvement. So let's keep an eye on that. All right, let's get into the situation report and watch some of the videos about what happened on the ground this week. So, to start the week, Russian forces unleashed a wave of drone attacks across Kherson Oblast. 2 police officers were struck and wounded by an FPV drone in Komishani. A 50-year-old man in Tekstilne and a 64-year-old man and a 61-year-old woman from Inhulets were also injured by drone strikes. Russian shelling on 27th October killed 2 elderly women, 60 and 75 years old, and wounded another 69-year-old woman in Dniprovsky Rayon. A 44-year-old Kherson policeman was also wounded by Russian shelling in Dniprovsky Rayon. Okay. On October 28th, 4 civilians were wounded by Russian forces. 2 women and 1 man were injured by Russian shelling. A 51-year-old woman in Belozerka, an 87-year-old woman in Centralny Rayon, and a 67-year-old man in Antonivka. A 55-year-old man was injured in Dniprovsky Rayon by a Russian drone attack. Let's see the events of the 28th here from Kherson ODA.
4:20, 4:30.
Вранці багато прильотів було. Ніхто нічого не бачив.
Ви вдома були, так?
Так.
Це ваша квартира?
Ні, ми внизу.
Синок, я уся сама отако задрожала, як гавкнула. Ой, мамочка моя рідна. А я так, і от це, ви знаєте, як чувствую, вже 3-й день оце так хожу, не роздіваюся, сижу на скамейці, і сижу і сплю так, і все. Боюся я, боюся. Мені вже 84-й год, я 42-го года. У війну родилась, і це синок старость така, і нема нікого, діти виїхали, а я це сама.
Ну что, все сняли, убирать его? На кого? Вот это? Ну, я не знаю.
Сюда один был. Какой по счету? Последний, наверное.
Постраждалих немає?
Нет, пострадалых нету.
Нет.
Перепуганные есть.
А пошкоджено що? Дах?
Дах, само собой, вот тут напротив, здесь стекла повылетали.
Okay, so you can see essentially how their those 2 elderly citizens had their homes completely destroyed by the Russian shelling on that day. Okay. Okay. 29th of October. This is the big day. Or one of 2 big days. A children's hospital in the center of Kherson was the main focus of Russian attacks on 29th October. As a result of the artillery barrage, 3 medical professionals employed by the hospital were wounded. A a 66-year-old woman serving as a junior nurse, and a 56-year-old woman serving as a medic, and a 40-year-old man employed by the hospital. 2 mothers and their children were injured by the shelling, a 42-year-old mother with her 16-year-old daughter, and a 36-year-old mother with her 15-year-old and 8-year-old sons. A 36-year-old man and a 57-year-old woman were also injured by the shelling. 2 more girls, ages 9 and 16, were also wounded in the attacks on the children's hospital. Word has it, I think it was President Zelensky in his post on Telegram said over 100 people were in the children's hospital at the time of the attack. So we're very fortunate that more people were not killed or injured, especially more children, but it's disgusting and horrific that so many were wounded in one incident, and it's the most that I know of in one incident as long as I've been tracking and paying attention to the Kherson direction. This is the largest single incident of child casualties. Okay, a 51-year-old man was also wounded by a Russian drone attack in Chornobayivka, where Russian drone teams are concentrating their strikes in an attempt to cut off Kherson from the outside world. Let's watch the video from the 29th. And we can see this is the director of the Children's Hospital in Kherson, Ina Holodnyak.
Сьогодні зранку заклад був обстріляний руснею. Внаслідок обстрілу пошкоджено відділення автоматизованої системи управління та УЗД-діагностики. 4 постраждалих, 1 дитина і 3 співробітники. Одного стан важкий.
Okay, so she had said in that address that 3 employees were injured and 4 children. It became known about that 5th child later on, I believe. Actually, are there 4 here? I can't remember. 16-year-old, 15, 8. Yeah, there's 5. Oh, excuse me. A 16-year-old and the 42-year-old mother, they came into the hospital the day after the attack, so they weren't counted in the initial investigations on the day of the attack, and then they came out the day after. Okay. And as you could see, there was, the blood of children and medical personnel all over the floor. I believe one of the medics, it might have been the 66-year-old woman, had eye injuries and I think she might have been in critical condition, or in a, maybe not critical condition, but like serious condition is probably the better word. Okay. On October 30th, Russian forces shelled another hospital, wounding 2 female patients, ages 61 and 83. A 65-year-old man was killed by the barrage, while 2 44-year-old men and another 61-year-old woman were injured. Russian drones wounded 2 men, ages 46 and 47, whose vehicle was struck in the village of Stepanivka, north of Kherson, along the highway. So again, keeping in line with that, with Russian forces trying to shut down the M14 highway, we've seen drone attacks in Chornobayevka and in Stepanivka this week. So the Russians are really trying to get over Kherson, behind Kherson, and cut off the logistics routes into the city, because it's really that northern section of the city that is the safest place at the moment. Okay, moving on to the next video and the next day. So the worst day of shelling this week was 31st of October. On 31st October, Russian shelling of the Dniprovsky market devastated the Kherson community. 2 people were killed in the attacks, including a 56-year-old woman who was selling goods at the market, and a 51-year-old man was also killed by the shelling when he was hit by shrapnel while smoking a cigarette on his own balcony. His wife survived the ordeal only because she was still indoors during the shelling. And like we said from Andri's video earlier, from Boxer's video earlier, she was in the kitchen while he was out smoking a cigarette. Okay. The shelling of the Dniprovsky market also wounded 16 more civilians, among them 4 men ages 43, 48, 51, and 51, and 12 women ages 48, 50, 53, 55, 57, 60, 61, 62, 63, 63, 73, and 73. Shelling wounded 4 more civilians that day. 2 men, ages 34 and 40, in the town of Bilozerka, and 2 women, ages 50 and 60, in Centralny Rayon. 4 men were injured via Russian drone attacks. A 60-year-old man in Bilozerka, a 42-year-old man in Dniprovsky Rayon, and 2 men ages 40 and 64 in Darivka. So it was an absolute bloodbath that day, as you can tell. Right, so we had 18 alone in Dniprovsky market, 2 from shelling in Bilozerka, for 20, 22 including Centralny Rayon, and then Bilozerka, Dniprovsky, and 2 more in Darivka. Almost 30 people in one day. One of the worst. Not the worst day that Kherson has seen in a while, but one of the worst. There was a day in August that was worse, and there have been a couple days sporadically, especially last fall. And last, like August to October, was really, really bad. So there were a couple days where shelling and drone attacks combined totaled up over 30 people, or almost 30 people, just like this. Okay. On the 1st of November, Russian shelling set alight a building in Kherson. While firefighters responded to the flames, Russian drones attacked one of the fire engines, damaging the vehicle. Images show the drone pierced a thick layer of rubber padding used by the Russian firefighters as a makeshift add-on armor to protect the crew cabin from skid drops and FPVs. These strikes, however, managed to completely penetrate the rubber and the crew cabin. In other artillery strikes, a 46-year-old woman was killed in Dniprovsky Rayon, while a 55-year-old woman was injured in Bilozerka. The firefighters were not injured, based on our information, so just the vehicles were damaged, thankfully. On Sunday, the week ended with Russian shelling taking the life of an 82-year-old woman in the village of Mykilska. That's... if you keep going east of Antonivka through Sadova over the Inhulets River, then you have Mykilska. 2 men, ages 53 and 56, were wounded by Russian shelling in Centralny Rayon. Russian shelling hit Dniprovsky Rayon, again wounding an 86-year-old woman, and 3 men, ages 29, 62, and 69. Russian drone attacks wounded 3 men, 2 men, 68 and 86, in Centralny Rayon, and a 48-year-old man in Karabalny Rayon. 4 civilians wounded last week sought medical care this week. A 60-year-old woman and a 61-year-old man were wounded by a drone attack in Bilizerka on the 24th of October. A 24-year-old woman wounded in the massive shelling of Shumensky Raion on 24th October also sought medical care. So that increases that casualty total even further, beyond 24 as well. A 52-year-old man was wounded on 23rd October in Kherson and received medical care this week as well. And as you can see, all civilian casualties that I've recorded this week, you can see visual record of them there. And then if you want to access the data set, you can actually look at the data set and find the source links. So you can check my work if you want. It's all public. And then Beryaslav, we only had one casualty reported this week. I get the impression that there's probably more, but there's just one report. So I can't make a judgment beyond that, but I really am skeptical of there just being one person injured in Beryaslav Raion this week. I wouldn't be surprised if we find out that there are more people at some point in time. If the drone safari lessens and we're able to get into some more of the villages, we might actually find that it's different. Okay, so in total, there were 7 people killed, 70 wounded, for a total of 77 casualties, almost all being in Kherson Raion, almost all being in Dniprovsky, as you can see. Pretty much all Dniprovsky and Centralny Raion. So the Russian forces really honed in just on those 2 sort of central districts of Kherson this week. Kherson city, Kherson proper. So 7 people were killed by shelling, 51 were wounded by shelling, including 1 police officer and 3 hospital staff. 18 people were wounded by drone attacks, including 2 police officers in Kherson Raion, and nobody was wounded by Garans or Shaheds or UXO. There were no reported Shahed attacks, but I believe there was a reported Herbera drone attack. So not quite the same, but much smaller warhead, but that's what we got. In terms of our damaged buildings and infrastructure report, much less than last week, but still some considerable entries. 33 apartment buildings, so pretty high number. Usually that's not breaking 30. Usually that hovers somewhere between like a dozen and 2 dozen, but we're approaching almost 3 dozen there. Private homes are a lot less than normal. Usually private homes is almost reaching or breaking 100. So being less than 75 is it's not a good sign, but it's much less than normal, but it's because Russian forces were focused on shelling other things this week, not just private homes, even though that's mostly what they hit. 5 administrative buildings were hit, 3 medical facilities, including 2 hospitals, 1 being a children's hospital. 2 educational institutions were hit, 2 dormitories of Kherson State University were hit, or the Kherson Medical College. I know there were drone attacks reported at both of those locations, but I'm not sure which one, or which those 2 dormitories belong. 1 church was hit this week by a drone. A cafe was damaged in shelling. We saw the Dniprovsky market was damaged by shelling. A store and a set of kiosks were damaged. Garages, several were damaged during artillery shelling, specifically on like a area of garages in Dniprovsky Rayon. Warehouse was damaged, 4 outbuildings, and 5 critical infrastructure facilities, 2 of those being factory buildings and 2 natural gas pipelines. In terms of vehicles, this week 1 police car was damaged, 24 civilian automobiles were damaged, 1 fire truck, 1 trailer truck or cargo truck of some kind, and 1 tractor. So that's all I have for you guys this week. Feel free to share the article, subscribe to Kherson Weekly newsletter, leave a comment, let me know what you think about the article. Feel free to ask me any questions, and you can share the publication. As always, sources are completely accessible in my little bibliography here, so you can access anything that I have access to and anything I've given you here. All right, thank you, and remember, Kherson will never be a Russian city.